Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and join me as we talk to other knife makers and craftsmen about anything and everything knives. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Levere, and I am joined by Johnny Stout. For anybody who doesn't know Johnny Stout, I would highly encourage you to investigate his work and his art. He's been a longtime knife maker and makes some of the probably the most superb art knife style pocket knives that I've seen. And he has a very unique style, incorporates some of the best engraving and on his work. And Johnny, it's really a pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, I appreciate the invitation, and I will share any and all information with you that you require or you feel that someone might be interested in.
Yeah, well, probably something that you don't get to see so much is the amount of people that talk about your work and everything when you're not around. But I, as a younger knife maker, I get to hear that all the time. So, I mean, your work is used as a case in point for, art knives and engraving and liner locks and fine folders and things like that. Your knife making classes are referenced fairly often. And, obviously we get to see some of your work inside of the context of publication, but you have a humongous reputation, especially from a lot of the younger guys, because your work is the inspiration and reference point that we use in getting into these more, I guess, niche areas of knife making. So that in and of itself is highly beneficial, just to be able to talk with you and pick your brain. So I appreciate you being willing to share with us.
Absolutely.
So I guess my first question is, what got you into making knives? Can you share a little bit about your background, maybe what you had done before making knives, just to give a little bit of context into where you're at today?
Well, I have to go way, 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 way back, and I'm going to start so far back that it may be too much. But when I was, before I even started to school, I started when I was 5 in Fort Davis, Texas. I don't know if anyone knows where Fort Davis is. A little small West Texas town. I was 4 years old, and we lived with my grandparents because my dad was in the service. And so we lived with my grandparents there in Fort Davis. Well, my granddad, I was born in 1943, so you can add it up and that'll let you know how old I am. But so I was about 4 years old, something like that, because I started school when I was 5. But my grandfather that we were living with was a government trapper. He worked for the state of Texas, and I don't know how many people today know what a trapper is, but he trapped for predators, bobcats, lions, coyotes, anything that could kill sheep or calves, any kind of livestock. So he trapped out on the ranches out of Fort Davis out there on the X Ranch. So he would take me on the trap line with him. Well, to where the knives come into all of this, evidently the state at that time provided him with his pocket knives. If he caught a varmint that he could skin the varmint, and sell the pelt, then he was allowed to do that. Now, he wasn't trapping for small predators like ringtails, fox, raccoons, or anything like that. He was trapping for lions and bobcats, coyotes, anything that could kill livestock. So when he would take me on his trap line with him sometimes, and we'd spend overnight out somewhere in a tent. But during the day, if he caught a predator, uh, he didn't skin and keep their pelts. But if he caught small, uh, like I said, fox or ringtails, coon, something like that, he would skin those pelts, and then he was allowed to sell those and make a little extra money. Well, where the knife thing comes into play is that he always had a double blade case pocket knife. Had those yellow plastic handles on it. And I guess the government, the state of Texas, furnished those knives for him. But he was always laying them up on a rock, and they'd fall off and they'd crack. And he'd keep using them. He'd sharpen them each time he had to skin a varmint, and he'd leave them laying around. Well, ultimately, he would always break the handles off of these knives, and that little pin would just be sticking out. Well, when he got to that point, he'd reach in his ditty bag and he'd pull out a new one, and he'd give me one of his old knives. So, as the years went by, and I'm talking many, many years, I think at one time I had 10 of those knives that he'd given me. And even in those early years, what I would do, I'd take one of them and I'd whittle out a piece of a little stick or something, and I'd get me a piece of baling wire and I'd poke a hole in that side, and I'd whittle it down, and I would put a new handle on the side of one of these knives that he would give me. Now this was in 1946, 1947. So over the years, I had about 10 of those knives. The years went by, I grew up. One thing led to another. Got married, and one day, um, the company I worked for back then, they moved me around about once a year, and they would always pay for my move. This was AT&T, in case anyone wants to know. They would always pay for my move, and the movers would come in and pack our household goods and everything, and then we'd get to wherever we were being transferred to, and then we would unpack. Well, as the years went by, I noticed that those 10 knives that I had started out with, I ended up with one or two of them. The rest of them were lost, misplaced, stolen, or whatever. They disappeared anyway. So I kept the two or three that I had, and these were all factory knives. I didn't even know there was such thing as a handmade knife at the time. But the years went by, just many years went by. So one Thanksgiving Day, we had been transferred to Odessa, Texas back then, and my mother lived, and my brother, they both lived in Fort Stockton out in West Texas. So we were there having Thanksgiving dinner with them one time, one year. This was back in the early 80s, if I'm remembering right. Could have been late 70s. So we were sitting down at the table, and my brother went over to the kitchen, and he was cutting the ham or the turkey or whatever it was we were having for lunch that day, for our Thanksgiving lunch or dinner. And so he had this knife he grabbed out of the drawer, and he was slicing some meat there. And I looked at that knife, and I thought, where did you get that knife right there? What's that? What is that? He said, oh, that's one of Jim Moore's knives. I said, what do you mean one of his knives? He said, yeah, he makes them. I said, you're kidding. How do you make a knife? He said, well, he's got a shop there in his backyard, and he makes them right there. So I said, are you kidding? Would he let me see how he does it? And I mean, at this time, I didn't know there was such thing as a handmade knife. He said, oh, yeah, it was just a hunting knife is all it was, skinning knife. So sure enough, he took me over there the next day, which if we were having Thanksgiving dinner there, then it was probably on a Friday or maybe even a Saturday. I don't know. So I went over there. Jim showed me how he made a knife. Jim Moore is who I'm talking about in Fort Stockton. And he showed me how to make a knife. He showed me how he cuts them out on the bandsaw and profiles them on a grinder. And he ground the blade there and showed me how to do it. Well, I was hooked. There was no question about it. So when I left there that day, he had sold me a bandsaw, a grinder, and a buffer. And here it is all of these years later. And believe it or not, I still have those 3 pieces of equipment that he sold me that day. So that was, I went back to Odessa and I didn't have a shop and I worked out in my backyard for a while. And then finally I had a little portable building put in and I started making these knives like he showed me. And I had no heat treating information. I didn't know how to do it. I had no knowledge whatsoever except how he showed me how to grind the blade. It was a hollow grind, which is a hard thing to learn if you know nothing like I knew nothing. But I would grind so many blades and then I would send them off to a professional heat treater and have them heat treated. And I'd get them back. So then I started having all of these blades there and years went by and I thought, I probably ought to do something with these. So I started putting handles on them. And then I found out that a lot of gun shows, they have knife makers there that have a table, rent a table, and they'll go sell knives at a gun show. So I thought, well, yeah, that'll be fun. I'll try that. So sure enough, I spent $50 and got a table at a local gun show there in Odessa. And I took, I don't know, 6 or 8 knives there, and I thought, I don't know how much to ask for these things, but I'm gonna ask $50. Nobody will pay that, but I'm gonna ask $50 for these knives. So I'd take them there, and by about noon on Saturday, I was sold out. I thought, oh, this is crazy. Something's wrong here. I don't know what it is. Nobody knows anything about me or their handmade knives or anything, but they're buying all these knives. So I went home and I'd make some more, and another show would come around and I would go back out there and the same thing happened. And then I had one young man about my age at the time. He came in one day and he said, have you ever thought about making a custom knife, a handmade knife? I said, what you see on the table is all I know how to do. I don't know how to make custom knives or anything. And he told me what he wanted, and sure enough, I decided, okay, well, I'll try it. So I took his order, and I went home, I made that knife, delivered it to him at a later date, and he turned around and ordered 2 more. And so this is how it all started with me. Okay, just as a hobby, like a lot of people have hobbies doing all kind of different stuff. Well, as it turned out, my hobby was I had a real job still, and I worked many hours a day. So it was mostly just evenings and weekends that I could work on these knives. But as the years went by, I got transferred out of Odessa down to San Antonio. And I didn't want to live in San Antonio, but my boss at the time lived here in New Braunfels, where I live now. So I decided, well, if he can drive back and forth, I can too. So I did that, and I may have mentioned earlier that I had started out working for AT&T. And again, when I moved to New Braunfels, I was still working for AT&T. And at the time, I commuted back and forth. I was on our what was called the area staff position. And so as the years went by, or during these years, I should throw this in for people that don't really know, the government broke up the AT&T organization because it was in a monopoly, and all of the different bell companies were on their own there for, I think, 5 years. And then the laws changed, and AT&T started bringing all of these bell companies back in under their parent company. And when they did that, they had very, very, very many service employees throughout all of the bell companies. And so the group I was in, my boss came around one day and he said, well, we're overloaded with employees. He said, I'm taking an early retirement, and they offered me a really, really good deal. And so he said, if you're interested, you might look into it and see what they can offer you. And I think I had, at that time, I had maybe 24 years with AT&T. So I decided to look into it, and I did. And so they offered me a buyout plan with, I think it was 7 years on my age and 7 years on my service, which it was a good enough deal that I decided to take it. So I did. And if I'm remembering right, which if it may not be exactly right, it's pretty darn close. At this time, I think I was 44 years old. And so I took this buyout, and I still lived here in New Braunfels. My kiddos were just little youngsters, and my wife was a nurse. But I was sitting at home all day with nothing to do except make some knives. So I started this knife show thing all over again. Well, what I didn't know at the time, that in New Braunfels, because there's so many surrounding towns within about 30 or 45 minutes, that there was a gun show happening every weekend somewhere, and there still is. So I thought, well, I'll just make some knives and go out to these gun shows again and do like I did before. So I started that, and that's how I ended up where I'm at today. And the years that early on that kind of got me to where I'm at today. And I was just doing fixed blade knives at the time. But I noticed that there were a lot of people that were interested in pocket knives. And like I said before, there was a gun show every weekend. And so I'd go to these gun shows, and people were starting to ask me for pocket knives. You know, everybody carried either a single blade or double blade trapper in their pocket, or one of the popular brands. And I thought, well, I'll just try one of those. So I bought one or two and took them apart and made a few. And then I had a couple of collectors that were really helpful, and they would critique these knives and tell me to do this and don't do that. And one thing led to another. And over the years, I just kind of evolved to getting more or less away from fixed blades and then to folding knives. And that's pretty much where I am today, even though I still make a few fixed blades. I do what I call a Texas trophy set, where I've got a hunting knife and a skinning knife in a double sheath, and those are pretty popular. If I go to a show and someone still wants fixed blades, well, so I'm available to do that. But so that's kind of my story up until now. And like I said, I've been doing this, and I do it every day. My shop's in my backyard. I teach classes, teach a class 1 week out of every month to someone right off of the street that knows nothing or to someone that's very, very advanced and wants to learn how to do some of the high-end folders that I build today. And so that's kind of me and my story as far as knife making goes.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested. You said that your dad was in the military. Was he? Did he go to World War II?
Yes.
Um, did he? Was he discharged, or did he survive the war, or kind of what happened with your father?
He did survive, but over the years, he and my mother divorced. And matter of fact, he died way back in the I don't remember now, late '80s, if I'm thinking right today. But anyway, go ahead.
And was he in the European theater or the Pacific theater?
I don't know enough about that to even talk about it. Those years to me were just kind of years, but he wasn't there, so it was hard to think back and put much information on it.
Oh yeah, no, I get that. So primarily raised by your grandfather then as your father figure.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, my dad was around. Like I was one of 8 kids, and he worked, but I don't know that I necessarily feel like he liked us too much. So he would always, I mean, he'd be around, but like absentee in a lot of ways. And so I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, which is probably why I actually find that I get along more with older people, especially like people my own age, because I still have those. Like both of my grandfathers were in World War II.
Okay.
Both European theater. One was a mechanic in the motor pools or whatever, and the other was the Army Air Corps. He was a bomber pilot. So yeah, it's interesting to me. Because I kind of had the same experience. Like my grandparents, my grandfather specifically, always carried around slip joint pocket knives, and up where I was from in the Appalachians in Pennsylvania, trapping was a big thing, and it was, you always would find guys that were carrying the 2-blade trapper, kind of like the Texas style thin blades.
Yes.
So I grew up with that, and that's kind of what like my early impression of knives as well. So it's kind of interesting. But when I know that before, when we were kind of just talking about getting you on an interview, you were talking about what got you from the transition, or what transitioned you from making fixed blades and charging what you did to starting to increase your prices. And I would love if you could like retell that to the listeners a little bit about your knife shows and what you saw at those shows, and the collector market and how that led to you like the price increase, and kind of like where you saw that shift.
Yeah. Well, having grown up with never any money except to pay the next bill or survive to the next paycheck, I'd never been around personally, well, I'm sure I had, but I didn't know it, people that had what I call real money. Now, a monthly paycheck or semi-monthly paycheck, everyone that I knew, that was pretty much what you did. You worked a week or two and you got paid, and you worked again and you got paid again, and on and on and on. Well, but it took me a long time to find out that people that had real money, and I don't have a definition for people that had real money, but I'll give you a quick little episode, or a little thing that happened to me one time at a show. And this was actually in San Antonio. But I was at a gun show over there back then, and I was setting up my table, and there was a gentleman came by, and the show was just opening, but he came by, and he had bought a few knives from me, and he got in early, I guess, because he was a he wasn't a vendor, but he was everybody knew him as a big spender. So anyway, came through and asked me if I wanted to go walk around with him at the show, and I said, "Yeah, I've got a little time here before they open, before it's opening." So we started walking around. He walked by this. We were going up down the aisles, and he stopped at this knife maker's table. He picked up this really, really nice little fixed blade. Had real ivory handles on it, and it was clean and just sharp as it could be. And I thought, oh man, that guy just made a sale. And so he looked at it and eyeballed it and checked it out, and then he laid it back down, and then we just walked off. And I made the comment to him. I said, "Man, that was a sweet knife." He said, "I thought you was going to buy that." He said, "Uh-uh." And I thought, "Was it too high?" He said, "No, too cheap." Well, I didn't know what he was talking about. It didn't make any sense to me. I said, "What do you mean too cheap?" I said, "That was a great price." He said, "Johnny," he said, "every knife in my collection," and this may not be the exact number that he said, but he said, "Every knife in my collection is worth $1,000." And he said, "If I put that $600 knife in there," he said, "it would devalue my whole collection." And I thought, no, that ain't right. And I thought, well, in his mind, it's right. So that's kind of when it hit me that people that have real money, and I've seen it since then at regular knife shows. I'm talking high-end knife shows where low-price stuff will not sell, high-price stuff sells. Now, that's not the mentality that most people that I know have, but it's that mentality is out there. Is all I'm saying about that. That if it's low in price, it's cheap. If it's cheap, I don't want anything to do with it. So I think that was what you were referring to, but
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's yeah, the people who have real money, it's basically the disposable income, right? Like those who make enough money where all their bills are paid and they have excess money to play around with and have hobbies and collect things versus just having to live paycheck to paycheck.
yes,
Yeah. And, that's something that's common. I've kind of developed this observational system where there's the knives in custom and handmade knives that are $300 or less, $300 to approximately $800, and then, $800 on upwards, right? And usually the $300 or less are their user knives, people who are just getting into knives, or they don't have disposable income, but they can come by, $250 every once in a while. There's that $300 to $800 market is for people who are kind of like intermediates or kind of like a little bit tighter with their money and are really scrutinizing over the price and maker. And then there's the upper end is there's a lot of collectors and people in that range, but a lot of their focus is in an individual maker and that specific aesthetic or art style, and whether they can justify that based on what their collection looks like. And I've always found that because I right now, a lot of my prices, because, I work full time. And so even though I value my time, I've never really charged an exceptional amount for my work. And I sit in that middle tier, and it seems to really be a hard tier to sit in, because you're either over the money for the basic knife buyer, or you're under the money for the collector. And so the ones, like, you get somebody who will invest the money in everything once in a while, but the sales typically are not as fast as, like, I had a few knives that were part of my probationary and voting member set for the guild.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of time in them and a lot of nice materials. And so I think I listed them for $800+ and they sold very quickly. But I've had some that have been, $325, $450 or whatever, that have sat on my table and never gotten sold, and have they sat on my website and never gotten sold. And it's, it seems like at times it's you can hardly give them away. But I've always been interested in like the psychology of selling knives, because it doesn't seem to ever make any sense. Like a knife that you pay $400 for, that's the quality of an $800 or $900 knife. Well, you're getting 50% discount on that.
Yeah.
But what I've realized is that a lot of people who are collecting knives are looking at the value of something as it relates to the secondary market. So if they buy today and they sell it tomorrow, can they make back their money, or can they make a profit on it? And if they think that they'll take a loss on it, then a lot of the times they won't buy it.
Yeah. Again, I think all of us need to keep that one thought in mind, is that no one has to have what we do. Now, there are a lot of jobs out there that people do have to have. But knife making isn't one of them. Buying knives isn't one of them. So no one has to have what we do. So my thought is this. Okay, again, it gets back to people that, well, I'm not sure exactly how to put this, but people that can afford it and don't need it, people that need it and can't afford it, and people that normally can't afford it are going to buy the $3, $4, $2, $3, $4, $5, $100 knives. So, to me, there's just no one answer or one solution that's going to be in place on every knife that is made. I mean, fortunately, I'm in a point now to where I think I have maybe 3 knives in inventory that I've been kind of rat holing, because I've got several big shows coming up between now and the next 6 months. And, but for me, they're easier to sell than they are for me to make and replace one that I do sell. But again, now this is something else, and I think it's very positive. And I've told this to many, many, many people. Every knife maker that I know has sold every knife that they've ever made, sooner or later. Now, they may not sell it today, but you think about all of the knife makers out there that are out there today that weren't out there before, say a few, several years ago, 5, whatever. But it's hard to see anyone now that has very much inventory on their table. If you go to a knife show, we go to keep our name out there. Now, this is another thing that I think is important to a knife maker. If there's a customer out there and he's used to seeing you at a show, whether he buys from you or not, if he's used to seeing your face, and then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, you've missed a show where he traditionally would have seen you, first thing that goes through his mind is, dadgum, I wonder whatever happened to old Johnny. he used to come to this show all the time, or I hadn't seen him, or he's not here. So then he goes on and he maybe does his business for someone else. So just keep those thoughts in mind if you're going to a show and then you drop that show. Let your customers know that, hey, it hadn't been productive for me to go. It's too expensive, blah, whatever the reason. I don't have any inventory. If you've got good customers that normally would like to see you there, let them know if you can that, well, I won't be there this year. I'm doing this, or my wife's doing that, or whatever. And one thing I will say on this: if your wife loves knife shows and loves going to the show, that's a very big plus in your favor. My wife, I swear to God, if we went to a show every day for 365 days a year, that'd tickle her to death, because she's a people person, and she can go to the grocery store, and I'm thinking, boy, she must be spending a lot of money because she's been gone for like an hour and a half. And she'll come back with this little sack of groceries, and she'll say, I met the nicest lady at the store. And then she starts telling this lady's story. It's just crazy. It doesn't make any sense, but it's if your wife is on your team and in your, boy, you let her run with it. I'll tell you, that's a plus.
Yeah.
Because all of them are not,
Yeah.
Some of them are like, oh, you're fooling around with those darn knives.
Yeah, I know several knife makers who have wives that are less than supportive, that's for sure. But, something that interests me about that is I think as a knife maker, we all tend to be a little bit reclusive. Like being in the knife shop and making knives is something that it's therapeutic and calming to us. Like we can live in a knife shop and we can like talk to our machines and what we're working on, and we never actually have to be around another person. But when you get out into exhibiting your work in front of people and everything, like I have to kind of force myself a little bit to put on that salesman hat. Whereas if my wife is there, she gets to see the other side of it. She gets to see the product that I'm making without all the flaws that I saw along the way, or the trials and tribulations I went to make it. So in some cases, she makes a lot better advocate for me and my work, and can sell it a lot better to the people who are coming by than I can. Because sometimes I'll talk to a person and I might shoot myself in the foot and almost talk them out of buying it. It might be something like, oh, hey, you want to change the handle color up or something like that. Like I can do that. Just like message me after the show and I'll go ahead and make it for you. And then they won't buy it. They won't buy what's on my table, and they won't contact me afterwards. And maybe it's because I'm wishy-washy, but if my wife is there, she'll tell them all the reasons why that's a great knife, and how great a knife maker I am, regardless of whether I feel that way about myself. So it's really good to have a partner that's in your corner that can help you get out of your shell and help to be the public presence for you, because I'd say it's in our nature to be a little bit more closed off and secluded, especially when we're making our knives.
Oh, I agree. I think if your wife is supporting you and is willing to go to shows with you, that's in your corner. That's good stuff in your corner. I'll tell you. Let me get off on another. It's not another subject, but something that's kind of great and not great at the same time. But the one thing today that has exposed knife making to more people than ever before is Forged in Fire, the TV show. Before that show, it'd be crazy to know how many people that it turned on that there's such thing as a handmade knife. What? You do what for a living? And you go to the knife
Yeah.
shows and you see them there. Some of them are the ones that were on the show. Other them just followed the show. But they go to their table, and if these guys are making knives and selling them to the public, then I think that is probably the one thing that has made handmade knives more user friendly and uh, popular. And I don't even know all the good words for it, but I think it's been a very, very, very positive thing for not just plain old vanilla knives, but handmade knives. See, because a lot of people don't know that a forged knife is you got to put it in the fire and then you got to get it hot and then you got to beat it and on and on and on and on and on. Uh, they think, well, you you want one of those, you got to go to Walmart to the knife gallery and buy one over there, you know. So I'm really, 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 and I always try to promote that genre, if you want to call it that. It's knife making, just like we all do, just different techniques. But I think that's been very good for handmade knives. Very good.
Yeah. No, I agree. And it's interesting. I would not call myself a knife historian, but the history of knives in America, especially around right before World War II to now, has been interesting because, like all these, like forging knives was something that was a parallel to blacksmithing and metalworking. And then as you have more industrial equipment available, stock removal becomes more readily available because the tooling's there. And then also when you have known manufactured steel coming out of steel mills and everything, people start using that. So it becomes more easily available to the knife maker. So stock removal becomes kind of its own path. And then you have the blacksmiths and bladesmiths that do their own thing, farriers and whatnot. And, you have the creation of the ABS and you have the creation of the guild. And sometimes people are making knives both in the stock removal and smithing variety. And then they kind of, shuffle off into their own groups. And once you kind of get past the maybe 90s and into the age of the internet, it seems like things are coming back together where there is definitely a distinction between stock removal and smith blades, but with Forged and Fire, there's a lot more attention and a lot more appreciation from a value perspective put on the forged blade versus the stock removal blade. And that's something that as a younger knife maker, we kind of have to distinguish. I can't tell you how many people ask me, well, do you forge your blades? I was like, no, I stock remove it.
Yeah.
And because I feel like it's disingenuous if somebody assumes that I'm forging a blade because they expect a Forged and Fire type of experience, and then I'm doing stock removal entirely. But the fact that there are so many people that are able to get into the craft and they're able to do it in smithing and in stock removal, that to me is a really great thing. Like I think that there are far more benefits to the knife world because of Forged and Fire than there are like detrimental things. We're kind of living in the good old days of blades now. I'm interested to know how that changes or stays the same as people continue to get into these older crafts again and they research, but definitely I've benefited myself from the Forged and Fire wave because of popularity for my knives and everything. So I don't see much of a downside to it.
Sure.
Other
Well, oh,
Well, I was going to say, other than anvils costing a lot of money now, comparative to what they were even 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's a fact. Well, when I first started making knives, it was all stock removal, but and the steels may have been out there, but the only steel that I ever knew about for years and years and years and years and years was 440C stainless steel. And probably my first, I don't even know how many knives were made with 440C. And then along came CPM 154, I think was the next one. And then, well, actually, it was CM 154. And then later on, CPM 154. And I used to know a lot more about the making and the era that the pattern metal came into play, but I don't, right off the top of my head, I don't. So over there on my steel workbench, I probably have at least, well, I'm going to say maybe 10 or 12 different steels that I've made knives out of that supposedly is the newest, latest, greatest knife steel. And then the next time someone else says, well, I've got one that outdoes that. And so I've got most of those steels over there in my rack. But yeah, handmade knives today is, I think it, I don't even know how to say it. There's I still stress to anyone that's making handmade knives is to put quality before quantity, and don't put knives out there with scratches on the blade or cracks in your handle material or on and on and on and on and on. Training, get training. There's a lot of the ABS. If you're in the ABS, they have a lot of schools, different, scattered around the country. Most of that is triggered by forging. I teach classes that are stock removal, and I have, I think, 4, maybe 5 different classes, all knife related. The only thing I don't teach is my automatic. But if you're interested in knives, find a good maker around close to you, and if nothing else, go in for a few days and get some tutoring. Like I say, hook up with the ABS and go to one of their schools or one of their classes. But you can poof your money off from now on till doomsday and never make a decent knife. So training right up front. Matter of fact, I had a young man in here last week that is he works in the, I don't know what he does, has an office job, but he decided that he wanted to do something physical and get his head kind of straightened out from what he had been doing for so long. And so he spent a week with me, and he sent home with a great knife, and I gave him a list of it. Now, you got to have one of these. There's about $4,000. You got to have this. That's about $2,000. You got to have this, and that's another $1,000. And so he went home with a list of machines and tooling for about $10,000. And he said, "So I have to have all of this?" I said, "No, you don't." But I said, your labor is the most expensive thing that's going to go into that knife, your own labor. If you price your labor right, you're going to have a lot of money invested in that. If you put it in there for minimum wage, I don't even know what that is now, $2 or $3 an hour, probably something like that. You're going to have a $100 knife. But good equipment and good tooling is critical, I think, and it's all available now. It wasn't in the early days, but now these grinders that flip, and you can get a vertical and a horizontal out of them, especially from the Travis Wirtz. I've got 3 of his, but there's more than different grinders out there that do the same thing as Travis's does. But tooling up correctly can save you some money and cost you up front, but it can save you a lot of money downstream there. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's all really good advice. I actually looked it up. The state minimum wage for Texas is $7.25 now.
Is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
which a lot of entry jobs now pay $15 to $17 an hour, but there's still a lot that are $7.25.
Wow.
Yeah, but I'm interested to know more about what got you. So, you started making knives and increasing the quality of your blades, right? And as that increased, so did your price. What got you into using engraving specifically as a way to embellish your blades?
Well, that is an art in itself for sure. Probably even much more so than the knife, at least the knives that I built. But early on, what I would do maybe a bolster, but I would make it out of Damascus, which had a pattern in it, and then I would etch the Damascus. After you get it put on and profiled and get your handle fitted up, etch the Damascus to bring out that pattern, And there's a lot of my knives out there. But it goes back a long, long way. And when I lived out in Odessa, there was a knife maker there in town that engraved his own knives, and he's still out there today. Unbelievable knife maker, a guy named Lloyd McConnell. Many of you may know him. He doesn't live there in Odessa anymore, but he was making these knives and engraving his own knives. But he wouldn't engrave for anyone else. But there was another fella out there that actually I forgot to bring him up a while ago when I started talking about making my first slip joint, but was Weldon Whitley. And Weldon at the time lived up out of Jowell, New Mexico up there. He still had a real job. And so I went out and spent a little time with him, and he helped me make my first slip joint pocket knife. Well, I'm going to change horses here in the middle of this stream again. So I kept that knife, my first slip joint. It was rough. So I kept it here till about 10 or 15 years ago, and I let a collector here in New Braunfels talk me out of it. My very first #1 folder. And I let him, he bought it from me, paid me good money for it. And I thought, well, I need the money more than I need my #1 knife. But I said, if you ever get ready to get rid of it, give me a chance to buy it back from you. So, to make a long story short, years went by and he passed away. And he had a really, really nice collection. But his wife called me up one day and he said, Jim gave me specific instructions, if anything ever happened to him, that this knife was to go back to you. And as it turned out, it was my #1 slip joint, little copperhead with mesquite handles on it, if I'm remembering right. So I went over and it was local, and I went over to pick it up and tried to buy it back. Nope, wouldn't take it. So anyway, I went ahead and accepted the knife back. Well, to make sure that I didn't mess up and sell it, to someone else. I gave it to my son. I said, now this is a family heirloom, and it's up to you to keep it in the family. Do not sell it. Don't show it off. Put it up. Put it in your safe and whatever. So he still has it. Now, my first fixed blade that I made, it was number 001, because I was numbering all my knives back in those days. And I messed around and sold that one, and it's still out there. So if anyone has it, if you'll sell it back to me, I'll buy it back and give you your money back plus anything else you want. I'll wash your car, wash your dishes, sweep your floors, clean out your shop. But I'm still looking for number one fixed blade that I ever made. Had some real pretty kind of reddish mirror polished blade, just a hunting knife with probably a brass guard and brass butt cap, if I'm remembering right. Might have been nickel silver, but it's got number 001 on it. So anyway, that I had to throw that little story in there. But we were. I was going to answer your question. Now I've forgotten what your question was before I got a sidetrack there.
Yeah, no, we were just talking about the trajectory of engraving on your knives. You're talking about Lloyd McConnell and his engraving back in Odessa, right?
Well, at the time he wouldn't engrave for anyone else, or at least he was doing his own engraving. But I found several guys that would engrave out there, and Jim Moore, the fellow that actually taught me how to build my first knife there in Odessa, he had gotten into engraving, so I had him engrave some knives. And Weldon Whitley also, at the time, he taught me how to build my first folder. He did some engraving, so I had some of my early knives engraved by both of those guys. And then over the years, all of my early knives were numbered. And I kept a logbook, which I still have, on who bought the knife, where it was sold, and how much they paid for it. And I did just a spiral notebook, and I did that till I got up to 1,000, number 1,000. And I thought, this is getting to be too much of a paperwork hassle. So I quit at 1,000, and I regret it now, because I probably got, gosh, I don't even know, maybe 6,000 or 7,000 knives out there, maybe more. I don't know, but I quit at 1,000. And one reason, a guy called me up here just recently, and he was in the area somewhere, Austin maybe, or somewhere in that area. He said, I've found 3 of your knives, and they all have a number on them. What can you tell me about them? I said, well, you tell me what the number is, and I can tell you about the knife. So he texted me and sent me his phone number. And so I looked him up in my book, and I found out who the first owner was, what the knife was, all the materials, and who bought it. And it turned out those 3 knives that he had were sold to the same guy. Now, he didn't tell me where he got them, but I sold them all to the same man. I told him the material, blade material, handle material, and how much the guy paid for the initial knife. So he had some history on those knives, and that's when I really, really started regretting not keeping that number continuing on past 1,000. Because there's a lot of, and another instant, I had a fella call me just in the last few days, sent me a picture of a knife. It's a folder, one of my very recent folders. And he bought it for a really, really great price. And he was asking me about it. And I said, well, just from the picture. All I can tell you is the handle material, and I said somewhere on that engraving that's going to tell you there's a number that's going to tell you who engraved it, not a number but a name, and I can tell you what model it is. But other than that, I didn't have a record of the knife. And again, that's one of those times I kind of regret not having that. Uh, it was an automatic, so it was a very recent knife. And so anyway, I can recognize one when I see it, but I don't have all of the details like I wish I would have on one. But what I was one of the thoughts I had a while ago, to me right now, knife making is probably let me think how I would even say this. If anybody's going to get into knife making right now, it's a great time because the market is great. You've got all of these great tools that'll help you advance a lot faster, like the grinders that flip from vertical to horizontal, which is basically two machines in one. But it's a great time training. I can take 5 years off of your learning curve in one of my 4-day classes. Doesn't matter what it is, but I can advance you 5 years in 4 days. And that's a guarantee. I'm not the only one that trains now. There's other instructors around, and I'm seeing more and more people are getting individual training or going to a class training. And so I think knife make and guys like yourself that are putting this stuff out there for the world to see and hear and maybe get exposed to for the very first time that's exceptional, and I appreciate what you're doing. I'm not sure how many people look you in the eye and tell you that, but I sure will.
Well, I appreciate that. Um, so you were mentioning that Jim Moore was doing engraving at the time. What was your next progression? So did you have knives that were engraved by Jim Moore?
Early on, I did. He and Weldon Whitley both, because I didn't know anyone else. In West
Uh-huh.
Texas, uh, like Jim was the only knife maker in Fort Stockton. uh, Weldon up in New Mexico, he was the only knife maker. There may have been more, but I didn't know him. So, as far as I was concerned, he was the only knife maker in New Mexico. And then when I got to down to New Braunfels, I was the only knife maker around here. And now there's several young guys now around that are doing mostly forged stuff, forged and fire guys. I think there's several of those around, uh, but back in the early days, yeah, Jim and Weldon were it, and Lloyd McConnell like that. I met him later on, and uh, but Lloyd still makes them and does his work is it's through the roof. It's outstanding. Now Jim, I think, is pretty much retired, and I think Weldon is pretty much retired, but they're still out there in West Texas.
Yeah. So and I mean, you've had a long list of collaboration with engravers. I've looked through some of the lists. So like Jim Small.
Jim, Jim and I did a lot of work for a long, long time. And then he lived down in Georgia, I believe, somewhere way off down there. And he had, gosh, I can't remember. He had a stroke, or a heart attack or something very, very serious and pull through. And Jim had been a engraver, but mostly he was engraving guns when I met him. He and I did a lot of work together for a long time till he had his uh, heart problem. Um, I was trying to think who else I worked with early on. Joe Mason. I met Joe Mason early on. He was still working for a living, and I forgot what Joe did, but it was either road construction or something like that. So he was out of town a lot, but he had a little mobile home he towed with him. And then when the job was over in the day, well, he had his a little engraving table set up in his little RV, and he would practice and everything. I don't know how I met him, but so I started sending him knives to practice on, and they were good enough that I was putting them on, just bolsters. Wouldn't send him the knife. I'd just send him the bolsters. If I got it back and it was good enough, I'd put it on a knife, and we'd increase the price on that. And so that's kind of the way Joe and I got started. Alice Carter, same way. She was doing some engraving, but it wasn't knife engraving. It was I can't even remember what it was now.
Yeah, she was doing some type of jewelry work at the time, wasn't she?
She was something like that. So that's the way Alice and I. Dale Bass now is doing a lot of work for me. He's out in Amarillo, and he's done a lot of my most recent work. I was doing and I'm still doing a project with her for AKI. Young lady up in oh goodness, can't remember where she's from right now, or I can't remember her name. But so she's got me on her books for a project for AKI, and Alice has one for AKI, and Joe has one for AKI. So I got to get busy and get those made pretty quick. But oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, so other notable names: Bruce Christensen, Julie Wierensky. Let me see here. There's a lot.
Bruce was doing unbelievable work. He and I did a lot of work, but he passed away. Julie was all of my work with her was collaborations for a fellow that actually owns Blade Magazine and Blade Show, and he and I had met, and then he knew of Julie and knew of me and several others. So we did 2 projects for him, I think. Julie and I did. I made the knife, she did the engraving, and someone else was involved in that, and I can't remember who it was now. But anyway, yeah. Oh, Julie, she's a superhero in her own right. She's a knife maker that no one would believe. Unbelievable stuff she can do. But she's kind of gotten away from the traditional, just the traditional knife stuff. She does maybe gun engraving more than anything else. I know her husband is a knife maker, but and he's an unbelievable engraver too.
Yeah, Buster Orensky, she was married to him first, and then she remarried. Right, I forget what her husband's name is now.
Yeah, I'm forgetting it too at the moment.
But You've also had engravers like Marianne Kelly, right?
Mm-hmm. Marianne Kelly. She is. Whew, she's unbelievably good. Now she's doing a project for me for AKI also. And if anyone doesn't know what AKI is, that's the Art Knife Invitational, which I got voted in as a member. I went 2 years as a guest, invited as a guest, and then the membership voted me in as a member. And that's in Las Vegas in October, and it's 20 top makers in the world belong to that. So I feel like, yeah, I can't describe how I feel about that. But
Yeah. Well, what year did you get inducted into the Art Knife Invitational group?
well, 2 years ago I went as a guest. They invited me back a second time as a guest, and there's only 20 members in that organization. So I went last October as a guest for the second time, and then I got invited back this time in October as a member. The members voted me in, so I'll be going back as a full member in October. And if anyone wants to see high-end knives out there that you are in contact with, that's the place to go. It's a one-day show, very short day. It's from 10 a.m. I think it's October 28th or 29th, whichever is Saturday. It goes from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. There'll be 20 knife makers there. We have to have at least 3 knives on our table. I've got one, so I've got to come up with 2 more between now and then. And some of the work there, if you want to see, last year I think the top knife that sold there off of the table was $120,000, something like that, in that same price range. So that's the clientele that are there and that are selling now. And I'll gladly take 125,000 or 120,000 for any knife that I sell, in case anybody's just standing out there waiting to spend some money. But no, it's just a wonderful place to come and see, and you can go as a guest too. You can, you still have to pay your way in, but you don't, and you don't even have to buy if you go in there but it's pretty unusual, and they're moving it to a new location too. They're closer to the Strip this year, so I think we're all pretty excited about that too.
Yeah. So for everybody who doesn't know, like, just how prestigious the Art Knife Invitational is, there's always usually a slow rotation of some of the world's greatest knife makers in the Art Knife Invitational. And there's 20 members, and they can invite like guest artists, but in order,
yes,
two a year, right?
Yeah.
And if there is a member that abdicates and moves on, they can fill that spot, but it has to be voted unanimously by all of the other Art Knife Invitational people. So
that's correct.
I mean, you have to have good rapport with everybody there. And is there a nomination process by the makers? Like, how does that actually work to fill a seat?
I suspect that it comes from the membership. Like I said, I haven't been involved in that, but I'm sure my name got put in the hat by one of the other members, which I appreciate that. But yes, I think you're absolutely correct on that. The organization's been in existence for a long, long time. It was traditionally out in, I'm going to say, Solvang, California. in that area. That may not be the exact location, but the fellow that had it finally retired. I think he had it like 20 plus years, maybe. He retired, and then I think maybe either his wife took it over, or when it came to Las Vegas, a lady had it, I believe, first. She moved it to Vegas, and then it's sold to the current owner, and this is his maybe third or fourth year of having it there in Vegas. This will be my third year to go back. So I don't know a lot of the history on it, but it's very prestigious, and some of the members that are actually in there are worldwide. It's not just U.S. makers.
Oh yeah, the list of makers is pretty incredible. And just for the sake of clarification, Julie Wierenski, after Buster died and everything, she remarried, and Kurt Erickson is her husband. So it's Julie Wierenski Erickson now.
That's correct. Yeah, she still uses her maiden name, or I guess you call it her. But yes, he is an unbelievable artist in his own right. Matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you went back far enough that he actually learned from Buster, at least engraving, when Buster was still alive. Buster Wierenski.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it looks like from his website. I mean, Kurt makes some incredible knives, too. I mean,
yeah,
they're both phenomenal knife makers. But I'm interested. So there was a brief period of time, or at least a few years, where you were part of the Knifemakers Guild, right? How many years were you in the guild?
I was in the guild. I'm actually still in the Knifemakers Guild.
Okay.
But I don't attend their shows any longer. After so long as you pay your dues, you can still be a member, but you're not required to attend the shows. I think that's the way it is, but I just pay my dues. So I've been a member for quite a while.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because I don't know if I've seen you come to any meetings recently or anything like that, but I've only been in it for the last, 2 years, starting with probationary. So
I haven't, like I said, I just pay my dues to keep the membership, and I think what the guild does is important, and they've got some good folks in there doing a great job, and so I always support them any and every way I can. But as far as being very active, I haven't been, just because I'm just me and I can only do so much, and my bucket is pretty full normally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about like your knife making journey and everything from the duration of time that you were active in the guild, you were rubbing elbows with an exceptional group of knife makers too.
It was, if I remember right, when I first joined, there was like 600 members in that. It was huge because the show was in Florida somewhere, and me being a pretty new knife maker, I went a couple of years, and my table was at the very back, and obviously I didn't sell a knife. I went back again, and didn't sell a knife, which was understandable because my knives were rough. But the guild that was in somewhere in Florida, and then they started moving it around. They moved it to Las Vegas. I remember that. I went there 2 years. Then they moved it to New Orleans, I think it was. Moved it there 2 years. And then after that it went over into the East Coast somewhere. And I didn't follow it after it went to New Orleans. But I stayed a member. But I wasn't required to attend shows due to my age, I think is what it was. So I just kept my membership up and didn't attend the shows. And then I think they quit the shows after a while because the membership dropped so low, or I don't remember what the deal was.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, what is Blade Atlanta? It was the guild show, but there was also the show that I believe that the rights, and I can't really remember if my history is correct, but the rights to the show itself were sold off to Blade Magazine, and they started running the Blade Atlanta show. And then there was some time later where the ABS and Guild started another show, and it was what was considered ICCE.
Yes.
And that was run in Kansas City until
Right.
the rights were given or sold to Jerry Moen, I believe. And then he ran it for a while and brought it to Texas, and then he eventually sold them off.
That's correct. I think you're absolutely correct.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So like the guild doesn't run shows anymore. They attend them and do recruiting and whatnot. But it used to be where the guild, that was the only knife show that you'd go to outside of gun shows, was, this guild that was created in the 70s and then got up to, a very high number. I mean, 600 knife makers of the world's best knife makers, arguably, were all in that place for
Yes.
a duration of time. And then as, politics and things got in the way and whatnot, the number started to dwindle more, and they sold off the rights to shows and things like that. So I would say that the guild is more of a historic and mentor association than it is, trying to manage shows and people coming. But there's still a lot of sway in the guild to get members to go to shows because they want to make sure that the show scene still stays alive, and we also have guild representation there. So it's not entirely dead by any means.
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for the Guild and the ABS. One of the most successful shows were the ones in Kansas City, where you had, I think there was, may be wrong, it seemed like it was split. 50 tables were each group, may have been more than that, but it was half and half, whatever it was. And I went on the ABS side the first year, and then I went on the Guild side the second year, and it was just I was just on across the aisle from the tables from the previous year. But it was now why they dropped that I don't know. Maybe just due to the two organizations involved, but I really enjoyed that show there in Kansas City. And then I do remember what you brought up there about Jerry Moen getting one and turning it into something and bringing it to Fort Worth, and it's all evolved. But everything in the world has evolved too. So
yeah, well, what's interesting to me, like if I look at your knife making journey and what you've done with engraving and things like that, is that you've combined your own art form, right, in making these knives and these patterns, right, and elevating it to a high degree, and then you work with some of the world's best engravers, and then you present those now as really fine pieces of art, functional art, but they're still art that has a lot of collaboration. You know, some of the best Damascus from the best Damascus makers, some of the best engraving in the world, all with you creating the blade itself, the canvas that they then collaborate with. Did you ever think back when you were selling $150 Hunter Skinner knives that you would ever be producing the kind of work that you are today?
No, and I'm not even sure that it was a goal. It just evolved as I've always been one that if there was a easier, faster, quicker, cheaper way to do something, then it should be considered to replace something that maybe I'm doing or something I have to improve, increase what I'm doing. And there's guys that still they'll rough grind their blade, and then they'll spend literally days and days and days hand sanding and hand rubbing it, which that's their technique. But I guess I've always tried to use technology as much as I'm physically smart enough to use it. Or if I've got room in my shop for a piece of equipment that will help me. And this is one thing I preach to my students is, look, your own labor is your most expensive thing that goes into that knife, because you got a piece of steel that you might have spent up to $100 on. You got some handle material you might have spent $100 on, and you might have a few nickel and dime things around here. So you've got a couple of $100 in material there. But when you get through, you've got a lot of labor involved on that. And if you want to get anything at all from your labor, the first thing you have to look at is quality. Quality comes first. It doesn't matter if it's $100 fixed blade knife or $1,000 folding knife. Fit and finish, quality is always, always, always number one. So if you price your own labor out at today's labor rates, I forget what you quoted there a little while ago, $15, $17 or whatever it was. If you price that out and you got 10 hours in that thing, so you got $170, you got $200 invested in it from material and labor, and you sell it for $200, then you've gone probably $300 or $400 in the hole just on lost time. So pricing is hard. And it's hard to price someone else's work just by looking at it other than fit and finish. And fit and finish is always number one. If you've got perfect fit, good, beautiful hand rub finish, it's going to add value to the knife in addition to the cost of materials and the cost of your labor. But fit and finish is always number one. It doesn't matter whether it's a fixed blade or it's a one of my own knives the other day. I saw a picture of it somewhere, and it was just, I don't know where the picture was, probably online or something like that. And I looked at that thing and I zeroed in on it, and I thought, I can't believe I let that knife get out of here like that. It looks like it got run over in the garage or somewhere or something. Looked like it had all these scratches on it. And that could have been just reflections of stuff I was seeing, but I mean, it almost looked like they had big old scratches on it. Well, my work didn't get out like that, so I thought, oh, I hope that's just a reflection or something. But for 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 makers out there, you can spend all your extra money and all the money that you can make extra and go broke really, really fast, or you can spend all of the money that you make and all the money you're going to make and advance if you do it right. But if you're how do I put this? If you're doing what you were doing yesterday and it's not any better than what you were doing yesterday, then you're backing up, because it should be better every stinking time. There should be something that you will be able to see on a knife after you get it built, whether it's a fixed blade, folder, automatic, whatever, double blade, three blade. But there should be something on it when you get through that you can look and say, "Oh, doggone it! I shouldn't have done that right there," or I did this, and I should have done it over here too. And but uh, I don't ever let a knife get out of my shop if there's something on it that I'm not happy with. But pricing is hard, uh, because what the price you put on that knife, a lot of that is, as a buyer, if I buy something, then I'm buying part of whoever that part or piece of equipment or whatever. To me, that's a part of that individual that I'm buying. It's not just a piece of equipment. That's the way it is with those knives. If you buy one, you're buying part of the maker there, and if that maker's putting work out that's not quality, well, that's you're getting part of that bad quality. So, but pricing is hard. Pricing is hard, but handmade knives are they're most fun and probably the most profitable thing you can do legally and still make good money.
Yeah. So I know I've been keeping you a while. It's getting close to
No,
dinner
we're good.
time, but I'm I'm really interested, because I think that if people have the opportunity to go to your classes, especially with the frequency that you put them on, and also because of your trajectory in knives and what you've done with your knife making career, that being able to invest the money in going to your classes is highly valuable. So for anybody, you can go onto Johnny's website and you can see the kind of classes that he has. You can contact him directly and talk through those and when his scheduling is and what availability he has. But take the opportunity before Johnny decides that he wants to hang up his hat and retire, to go in and get a class, because there are a lot of classes out there that pay out dividends, but the specific style that Johnny goes after, the specific technical detail and how he communicates how to make these things. Everybody I've seen that have taken your class, in general, produces exceptionally better knives after they go to you. That's just what I've seen across the board. And I know a lot of knife makers that have taken your classes. But is if there are some like pearls of wisdom out of what you see in your classes that you want to give to makers, kind of in preparation for the idea that they might go to your classes, what are those things? Like, is there some hit list of things that you think that a maker should pre-qualify for, or focus on in order to take their artistry to the next level?
Well, for any of my folder classes, the only thing I require is you have to know how to grind your own blade. Now, it doesn't matter what kind of knife you're making, but if you've got a crappy grind on the blade, you're going to end up with a crappy knife. Because one of my folders, especially one of my, what I consider my fine folders, one of my high-end folders, there will be, counting nuts, bolts, screws, pivots, blade, bolsters, handle material, all the material. There's around 30 different piece parts into that knife. And when you get it all screwed together, if every little bitty thing is not just perfectly accurate and perfect, it's going to show up in that knife when you screw it together. It's going to take a long time to build that knife, but when you get through, my classes, they're all the same price. They're 4 days, and there's no more than 2 students per class. The only time I've ever had more than 2, and it was a special thing, one of my students one time, been quite a while ago, he went through just a plain, what I call my basic class, which is a fixed blade, like hunting knife. And then later on, his son graduated from high school. So he called me, he says, I want to take a class with my son and my grandson and me. Would you take a class for 3 of us? I said, well, I've never done that, but I said, I will in your case. So that's the only time I've ever had 3 in a class, and it was because the dad, the son, and the grandson taking the class together. So that was kind of special. But normally it's just no more than 2. And to be honest with you, many times when there's 2 in a class, it's more productive for the students because they will kind of feed off one another, and maybe one will think of a question that the other wouldn't have thought of to bring up. Well, what do you think about this? Or how did you, so the 2 per class is very productive. Again, the only requirement for any of my classes except the basic class, you don't have to know anything. You just have to have the tuition, and then I teach you everything else. But for my folder classes, 2 guys, you take home you're going to pay me $2,500, and I promise you'll take home a $3,000 folder. Now, it'll be a $1,500 folder if we use plain Jane basic materials, which I provide. But if we're going to use some CPM 154 for the blade, and we're going to use some 416 for the bolsters, and we're going to use some micarta for the handles, and just basic material. Most of the guys that'll take that shop, though, they'll bring their own high-end material, like some ivory for their handle, maybe a pearl, or they'll have some Damascus for their blade and their bolsters. So then they're going to take home a $2,500 folder, or maybe even more, because if we have time, we're going to do file work, we're going to do jeweling, we're going to do anodizing, and all of these little tiny things that come into play that add beauty and a value to the knife that you're not paying for, but you're getting that to take home in that knife with you if you furnish it a little bit of the high-end material. But you don't have to. Otherwise, I furnish everything. Two per class, they feed off one another. That's where I was getting to. One will think of something and, oh, that's a good idea. I never would have thought of that. And the same thing, and this will go on for 4 days. And each one will be kind of feeding off the other. So it's a great class. I only do one per month. And it's 4 days, Tuesday through Friday, full 8-hour days. Monday is my day to get the shop cleaned up, straightened up, ready for the class. Otherwise, it's my workshop, and this is where I do all my work. But Friday afternoon, you go home and you'll take a knife folder with you. If you don't know anything about knife making, then you want what I call my beginners or basic knife making class. The hardest thing to learn is how to grind the blade. And I'll teach you how to do that. And I promise you, within those 4 days, you'll be either sick of it, you want to go home and start selling pop bottles, or you want to stick with it and learn how to set up your own shop and do this work back in your own shop. But I've been doing it for a lot of years, and I've turned out a lot of guys that are doing work. I hate to brag, but they're doing work better than I am. if that's bragging, then I'm bragging on them. But anyway, that's my story, and I'll answer questions. You can call me on the phone. Like I said, I only do one per week, and that doesn't mean that I do one every week of the month either, because it just depends on my schedule and if I can fill it in. Because I'm still doing like 7 or 8 shows per year, so I have to add my classes in betwixt all those show dates that I've got going. Because this is the way I make my living. It's my real job. I don't have to work very far to get to work, but I still have to go to work every day.
Yeah. No, I mean, I appreciate the investment that you've made, in addition with your contributions with your own art form, but also furthering these particular type of knives that you make, and being available to talk with anyone. I've never felt like you were inaccessible or that you were unwilling to answer questions. I think the first time I ever met you was at a 100%ers build up in Plano. It was the first knife show I'd ever been to, and you and Tom Overeinder and a few others were up there, and being able to see your work and the encouragement that you gave everybody to pick them up and to actually feel what a good knife felt like, to me was a big factor in continuing to make knives. Not only your willingness, but just to be able to look at an example of a fine knife has just snowballed into this journey that I'm taking with not only trying to produce a good knife, but then also trying to capture the imagination and the passion of other knife makers through the podcast. So you're a big inspiration to me, and I know a lot of other people in the knife industry as well.
Well, I appreciate that. Like I mentioned, I just do my thing. But if you're trying to learn to make knives on your own, you're in for a long pull, I'll tell you, because the quality of work out there for everybody, the equipment that we have, the materials we have to work with, it really takes a lot off your learning curve. And then if you have some one-on-one instruction, but if you learn to do it wrong, and I don't know if wrong's the right word. Maybe I should just say if you learn to do it not the best way that's available, sometimes it's hard to back away from those skills and those practices if you've been doing something for a long, long time a certain way. I don't know that the way I teach is the very best way out there. It's just my way, and the people that have been successful at it, a couple of them, I swear to God, their work just, they, like a rocket, they just soared when they took off on their own, and they're still out there making great knives. And, I appreciate guys like yourself that's spreading the word and interviewing me and letting me spew my venom out here on everybody.
Well, I really appreciate it. Hopefully one of these days I might be able to come down for a week and take one of your classes. I think that would be super cool. But in my life, it's been just a matter of trying to accommodate knives in a world where I already have a full-time job and a full-time family load and everything like that. But I see the incredible value in being able to have some one-on-one knowledge transfer. So if we get to a place here maybe next year where you're still feeling up to it, I'll try to come down for a few days and do one of your fine folding classes.
Glad to have you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being on the podcast and sharing yourself with us. I learned a lot more about you in this hour and 50 minutes or so than I had by trying to do a bunch of research on you online. So hopefully this is the case with other listeners and they get to know Johnny Stout. And, for everybody listening, take a class from him, ask him questions. He is a pillar in the knife making community, and you'll be hard pressed if you don't spend a little bit of time with him and get to know him too.
Well, thank you so much, and anything that I can do for you or for your clients, like I said, phone calls, whatever. Sometimes I can. Somebody's got an issue that just been bugging them and eating them up. I can maybe help them solve it with, or sometimes just with a phone call, maybe share a different technique that might be more profitable or presentable for them. And I'm here. So appreciate you guys.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.